engineer intern. Happy to answer any question.
Awesome.
Okay.
I will also quickly
Awesome.
say, because I just realized this is actually BCS, and I was not in BCS, I was in BSc for computer science. Um, so I'll just quickly make that disclaimer in case people think I'm BCS. Let's uh,
Okay.
let's move on.
Okay. Gotcha. So, okay. All right. So I just, before we actually get to the topic, I just want to say, I planned this entire workshop just by a recording. So basically, what I see, how I see this going is just having a informal conversation with Benny and Leo, just to talk about a bit of my experience during last term, and also ask for their experience and let them talk about um their tips about finding an internship. And I didn't plan it with a lot of like how do I say, a lot of audience. So that means, everyone is welcome to hop on the chat and ask your questions away. But I will majorly prepare, the major part of this conversation is going to be some questions that I prepared. But feel free to chime in at any moment. I will give you the permission to speak. Okay, let's move on. So basically, um, the reason why I talked to Benny and Leo is because I was trying to plan for my next term to see what courses are there. My plan for next term is to find an internship like really hard, and that means I will take less courses than normal. I took 4 courses, and it's taken me a lot of time, and I didn't have much time to prepare for the job search. Um, and also I wanted to make sure that my course is kind of in the same direction of finding an internship. That is to say, for example, if it's a Cantonese course, it's probably not going to help me to find an internship. So I just want to find some good um, courses that it can help me along the way. Um, so I talked to Benny and he gave me some really good recommendations. He asked me to take 310 because this course is about software engineering and it's about building a web app, and I found that really interesting. Although it's going to take a lot of time, but it seems like it's going to worth it. Mm, and that also inspired me to ask more questions. Like Benny told me he has done his job search. He has just secured an internship with Meta. That's really amazing. So that means he is really good at this intern search kind of thing. So I talked to Benny. Benny also mentioned Leo. Both of them are really good at finding jobs and preparing for interviews. So I guess the next thing I want to do is just pass the stage to Benny and Leo and ask them, like, uh, based on your experience, what can we do in this holiday? And in general, like, what do you think is based on your experience, what is a good way to find internships? How about we start with Benny first?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for me, I've always had a plan on what I wanted to do. So back in 2022, I knew, back then I had zero internship. So game plan back then was to secure one internship, no matter the company.
Mm,
And then in 2023, when I got my first internship at IBM, that's when I became more selective. So now I'm sort of looking at, kind of like mid-tier tech companies, like by market cap. So then I kind of narrow down into a more narrow list. And then I think for this summer, I've only actually applied to about 15 applications, focusing, solely on, I guess, the so-called like FANG adjacent companies. So I think the biggest advice I would give is like you should have a plan going in, what you want to achieve. So if you're targeting the bigger companies, the things that obviously you need to be good at would be like lead code, versus if you're like in a startup and then like you're searching for a first job, um, like it might be worth it to have maybe more like project based. So to show that you have experience, so that could attract like some of the local startups in that sense. Um, yeah, that's kind of my biggest advice, I think. I'll pass it to Leo though. He can probably provide a bit more.
What was the question again? Just it was pretty general, right? Like
Yeah,
what to do.
it's it's kind of a general question. I guess, okay, how about this? Let's set some priorities. Like, right now, what I can do is, for example, I can first choose to do a resume, to like polish my resume. Second thing is to like find some projects. Third thing is also
Mm.
find some good courses to plan for next term. And what do you think right now? Like, what should I do first?
Oh yeah, I think that's a better question. I think that's a better question to tackle.
Mm-hmm.
Priority wise, I think it's helpful mostly to look at school and like school in terms of classes, that is specifically classes, and your personal endeavors to be separate. And the reason I say that is because you don't really want to tie your plans and your goals to hitting certain breakpoints in school, right? So the example you just gave, which is that you want to take 310 because it's useful, yada yada. Um, it is useful, for many people, and that's great. But you shouldn't say, "Oh, I'm not gonna do X, Y, and Z until I finish 310." Right? So that's not a mindset you should get into. Instead, you should be thinking about it as, "Oh, I want to acquire these skills by a certain date, so I can do X, Y, and Z." And as part of my goal to get some skills, 310 plays a part in it, right? So I think that's a much more productive mindset to be in. Otherwise, you'll be more reactive in that sense that you won't be incentivized to do stuff, whether it be like your own self learning or various other parts of the application cycle, until certain other criteria are met. So don't wait for the other things. And
Mm,
in terms of priorities outside, so 310, great, yeah. So take the classes, whatever. I'm not going to focus on that because frankly, I don't think most of those classes really matter. They matter for you to graduate, so you should take them, but they don't matter in the sense that they're oftentimes not the only way, or they're never the only way to learn those skills, right? So for some people, a structured setting like a class is the best way to learn, but I mean, at this point, this is either your second degree or you've got some prior academic experience. Hopefully, you can know yourself a bit better than I know you. So you should judge for yourself. Is that the right kind of path to take, right? Now, on the other
mm,
hand, there's also another kind of thing to consider. Now, the specific example you gave was, should we, work on the resume? Should we work on a project, etc. Right? Now,
yeah.
uh, an easy answer to that, first of all, is you can't really self-evaluate that. Just intrinsically, you can't really self-evaluate what your own weakness is in that sense because you aren't the hiring committee, right? Like you can't know what you're deficient in if you're not the guy who makes the final decision. And so I think a general good way to kind of get around that shortcoming is to get people who do have more experience to review resumes, review projects, etc. for you. And what that
Mm,
lets you do is it lets you give you a very clear, course of action, right? For example, if you were to give me a resume, and now this is not simply your resume, but let's say you give me a resume, right? And then I say,
mm-hmm.
oh, this person's, I can see they got some school projects, they got X, Y, Z, blah, blah, but I can see they don't have this skill, which is very, very needed in the industry right now, right? If you don't have that skill, you don't know that you don't have that skill, no matter how you polish a resume, it's not going to come out, right? So that's a
Mm,
situation where you need to get that feedback from someone in the industry and then go address that feedback by learning the skill or doing XYZ projects or otherwise proving that you have the fundamental to kind of handle that, industry. So I'd say the number one thing there is to always have a mechanism to get feedback for things like a resume or for things like, and this is a resume example, but this applies to all aspects of applications, right? So for example, resumes, getting resume feedback, right? Get resume reviewed by your friends, by your mentors, ask, etc. There's a lot of events people hold these days. I won't plug any of them, but there's a lot of events people plug these days that provide resume reviews, right? And also,
mm,
once you get past the resume screen, right? Okay, great. There's, that's only the start of the journey, right? If you're talking about getting hired, you got to pass the interviews, right? Technical interviews, behavioral interviews, hiring manager, team match, etc. All these sort of interviews. Um, it's really hard to self-evaluate, right? And that's why you need to get feedback on your own performance in that regard. So I'd say,
yeah.
oftentimes it's not really productive to say, oh, I think I'm here. I think I need to do this and this, right? It's oftentimes better to say, okay, I don't really know where I am. I'm not gonna pretend to know where I am. I'm gonna just go straight to get in contact with someone who has what's going on, like who has information on what's going on in the industry, and get them to evaluate where I'm at. So I think if you flip the question on its head in that sense, I think it's a lot more productive, right? And
Mm,
that's also why, and by the way, and the reason I'm answering this way more abstractly is because I can't go, okay, for this winter, you should make this and this project. Well, I can't say that because your situation is very, very different, right? Everyone's situation is different, and depending on your situation, the feedbacks can be completely different, right? I'll give you a common example. A common example I see people, and by the way, this is not blaming other panelists, right? But I see people go to like these panels and they say, oh, you're in BCS or BSc more commonly, right? And I know for 210 you make a buses RS or whatever it is these days, to-do list, and then for 213 you have this thing, for 221 you have these things, and so typically speaking, everyone who's taking these courses should make this project because that's a gap, and they're not wrong, right? They're not wrong because that is a gap if you took those courses, but a lot of people who are more self-motivated, who do pursue projects on their own time, might have already gotten a project which covers those gaps. And so that advice wouldn't apply to that individual, right? And so how should that individual know if a certain piece of advice applies or doesn't apply to them? And so it's really, really dangerous to give kind of broad and helpful. Like, you can give broad advice, like don't do drugs, but that's not helpful. You know what I mean? So I can't sit here and say, oh, you should do this, you should do that, you should do that. No, it's more like, okay, here's how you should determine how you should do things, and not like specific actions that you should take.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's a couple good points that you brought up during the thing you said. I do realize that like we don't need to finish all the courses to call ourselves ready to find an internship, especially for me, for my cohort. Many people has already gotten their internships before this winter term. So basically that means they have already passed their minimum requirement and they have started finding for internships already. And while some courses are helpful to find an internship, they are not necessary anymore because so many people has already found an internship without this experience. Like, because we have also in the crowd some like first year BCS students, they just finished their 110 course and 121. But do you think that's a good time for them to start searching for an internship already?
I think that's one. I mean, that's a pretty good question to ask because that's general, but it's not really necessarily asking for an action. I would say for the vast majority of students who have finished 110 and who have only finished 110 and 121, should instead spend their time getting ahead in either other mandatory courses. Like, I would say bare minimum, you should know 210 like object-oriented programming very well before looking for jobs, because that is sort of considered base knowledge. Even for like entry-level internships, that would be considered very base knowledge. And so, generally speaking, that would be my recommendation, to either get ahead in the course or do your own learning on the side. There's a lot of different really good resources for learning content that is similar to 210. I would say that's a better use of your time than to start applying right at that kind of stage.
I can relate to that. At winter term 2, I went to a job career fair, tech career fair, basically a job fair, and I talked to people. There's some people I know from a company visit, and they are having a hiring stand there. So I went there and I talked to them. I was like, I just finished my 110 course, and I'm looking for internship. Like, what kind of question will you normally ask for a technical interview? And she started to ask me the 4 pillars of OOP. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. She's like, you probably need to wait a little bit, finish your 210 and come back to us. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So I'm in my mind, the minimum requirement is to finish 221, the data structure, but I guess finish 210 can already let you get started with the job search already. That's very helpful. Thanks. And
I mean, I'll put a little caveat there, right? Like again, you shouldn't really wait for certain breakpoints to do things, right? Like the way I want to phrase this very, very, very carefully is that, like, you should, like, it's more worth your time and effort to apply after learning object-oriented programming, opposed to applying without that, right? And I'm not saying you can't apply. You should still apply if that's interest to you, right? There's no harm in doing that, really. But you should just be aware of that in terms of, like, time efficacy. Like, your time is much better spent doing 210 related content, right? Now, that's different than me saying specifically you must have 210 on your transcript before people look at you. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that whether you have 210 or transcript, or you have some other way to prove that you have the knowledge, like for example, a side project using Java or something, right? That's what people will be looking for. So that people aren't looking for 210 on transcript, people are looking for that skill. And most people who get that skill get it from 210, which is not saying that you can't get the skill elsewhere, right? So I'm just making that distinction very carefully.
Mm, that's fair. Yeah, I think it's more about the ideas and the course or the like formality, the thing on the paper. So I totally get what you're saying, and I also like since we're on that topic, I was reviewing my resume. I have a bunch of projects I have done over the last year during my BCS study, but it's like I took a quick count and I realized I have 9 projects. It's definitely too much to put on the resume, and I set my eyes on the 210 project I made. I remember you saying that um, because you also do resume reviews, and you said like if it's some class projects, it's probably not going to set you out from the crowd. And
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, but at the meantime, we spent so much time at school doing the school project,
Yeah.
and sometimes some people wouldn't even have time to do projects on the side. Is there anything we can do on the project we have on hand,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's a school project? And if
Yeah.
yes, what can we do about it?
Right. So that's a pretty good directed question. Let me open it up from a different perspective, right? So 210 and 310 are mandatory courses for all UBC CS students, right? That
Yeah.
means if a resume from UBC student lands on someone's desk, they have to have done the 210 project and they have to have done the 310 project to pass the course. Right? They might not have done it spectacularly, but they must have done enough to pass the course, right? So that's the baseline. That is every single UBC CS student that has ever graduated of all time has finished those two projects, right? That is the baseline. And so if you have done nothing above that baseline, you're not inherently more competitive than the other candidates, right? So that's the perspective that we want to open the conversation with. Now, that being said, of course, what I like to advocate for is the most time efficient way to learn new skills is not to make a completely new project just to learn that new skill. Oftentimes, it's far better to take an existing project which has a decent enough base to then build upon. So I don't. I'll comment. Right. I don't know what the current 210 project is. And in fact, I think it's actually open format now. But when I did it, it was like a TransLink app that you can see the buses on. Right. So okay, great. It's a TransLink app you can see buses on. But the front end was like really bad. It was like really really bad. It worked, but it was like really bad. And so I said, okay, like I want to learn some front end technologies. What I'll do is I will use this existing backend for 210, and I'll just make a nice front end for it, right? Because then I can have because then if you think about it, if you put it together, what happens is that you got a nice functioning backend and a nice beautiful front end UI, and so that's how you can leverage your existing projects, whether it's 210 or a different existing project, but that's how you can leverage an existing project, such as a class project, to learn a new skill. So say that's the best way to kind of use class projects, right? Because keep in mind, if I see someone on the resume and they put the 210 project or put the base 310 project, and I'm seeing this for UBC, but SFU, UVic, all these different schools, I know all their projects. I see them all the time, right? If they just describe the project as it is, then I know that you have nothing better to show. Because like this, like of all the products, let's say you have a resume, right? You have room for 4 projects. Let's say for argument's sake, let's say 4 projects, right? And if 2 of the projects are school projects, you're telling, or if 3 or 4 of the projects are all school projects, you're basically telling me that you have done no projects. Like you've done the bare minimum to kind of qualify for this, right? So keep in mind that that's the implicit signal you're sending.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I actually I just called Benny this morning just to talk about my class project for 304. It's a full stack project, but the full stack part is implemented by the course team. So I have a database that's working that's totally designed by me, but the front end is really not looking good. And I'm planning to spend this winter to like upgrade it to a better version. I guess that's the strategy you just mentioned, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Also, I want to say this. Sometimes I go to your resume review and I see the resume that's presented to you, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I get scared because there's some really like amazing resumes in the
Yeah.
sense that, for example, I think last week I just see someone having a resume doing a project on something like Ruby on Rail, all a bunch of fancy words that I have never
Yeah.
heard at school. So these kind of projects, while they are important, uh, are they like totally outside class? And if that's the case, like how do we find a time, or what is a good strategy to pick a good project that's worth learning this new skill? Like for
Um,
example, let's just say Ruby on Rail. Like if you want to learn it, what would be a good chance for you to learn it, or what would be a good reason for you to learn it?
so I think there was two questions there. The first question was more of an observation that people who submit resumes to my resume review sessions have strong
Mm,
resumes. That's the first observation. And separate from that, you're saying some people have projects on their resumes that are separate from school. How can you find time to do them? Is that right? Is that the right read?
yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll answer the first one first. Um, yeah, people who submit resumes to my resume review have some resumes. That is sample bias, because people who are not interested in improving themselves or the resume, people who are not interested in the job hunt, they're not submitting the resumes, right? Those people who are not getting jobs, they're not submitting them, right? They don't care about
Mm,
me, right? So of the people, so if people who submit resumes means that they already intrinsically care about self improvement, right? They're introspective about what's not going right. So don't be disheartened by that, because it's a sample that's the people who are trying very hard, right? I see a lot of resumes from people like professionally, from like at work, from people who do not try very hard. So they exist too. Okay, so don't feel bad about that.
mm,
I'll just leave it at that. Just keep it polite, right? So and that's fine. Like you don't have to try hard. I'm not saying you have to, but I'm saying like there are people who don't, and that is what it is.
yeah.
Now, now the actual question you had, which is okay. Well, some people have, people demonstrate skills and resume by having these impressive projects such as Ruby on Rails. Where do people find time for that? Now, there's kind of two things. There's kind of two things at play here, and it's a bit of a deeper question. So I'll break this into two parts. The first part is just answering it literally. How do people find time for this? Well, I mean, that's a very personal question. It depends on the person, right? For example, some people they just take a lighter course load. Some people they have fewer personal responsibilities. They don't need to take care of as much. They just have more time for this kind of stuff. Some people just operate on less sleep, right? Some people just it's healthy or not, no comment, but they just don't sleep as much, right? So that's a very personal question that I can't really answer that one, right? It just depends.
Mm, that's
Now,
fair.
right? So now the other question, which I think is a bit more informative to answer, is how do you find time to learn, or what process or time or ability do you find to find time to learn new skills? And the way I'd answer this one is a specific technology, like for example Ruby on Rails, is not relevant, right? And that's not just Ruby on Rails. That's true for all frameworks, like even React. I would say the specific framework does not matter, right? But one thing you'll soon realize is that basically all of these web framework technologies, like Ruby on Rails, React, etc., all of them follow the exact same underlying principle, just a model view controller principle. Every single one of them. This is the framework, the principle that has stood the test of time, right? And so all of these different technologies are just different ways to implement the MVC pattern, right? So you don't learn Ruby on Rails. What you do is you use Ruby on Rails. Let's say this is your very first time you're learning MVC, right? I think there's a course for that, but whatever, right? The first thing
Mm,
you do is you learn Ruby on Rails. You figure out how Ruby on Rails works. Great, that's easy. There's so many tutorials on that, right? And
mm-hmm.
then you learn MVC. Okay, so this is how I do. This is how I do process X with Ruby on Rails. This process is encapsulated through this pattern. Okay, so then you learn the MVC pattern. And then once you understand the MVC pattern, you can use that understanding of MVC, not the understanding of Ruby on Rails, but you can use that understanding of MVC to then learn React or then learn Angular or all these different frameworks, because they all follow the same principle. So it's not about
Leo,
learning. Yeah, go ahead.
what is MVC?
MVC stands for Model View Controller. It is the I would say the most common, but is arguably the only pattern to make basically anything web related these days.
Okay,
And
good to
so
know.
this is basically the underlying principle. This is kind of like OOP, right? Um, we have OOP in Java, we have OOP in Python, we have OOP in C++, C Sharp, etc. Right? So 210 you learn OOP through learning Java, right? The first thing you learn in Java is how do you write these very basic things in Java, and then you use that to learn. Oh, this is how we represent a car in Java. This is how we represent, binary tree in Java, right? So
Mm,
you learn Java, then you learn OOP, and then with OOP you can then say, oh, I know how to do, let's say, encapsulation in Java. How do you do it in C sharp, right? Then it's much easier to learn C sharp because you already know the principle ahead of time. You're just applying the specific mechanics and syntax and language rules to express that pattern, right? And it's the same
right.
thing with web technologies with the MVC pattern. And so it's not
Mm,
really about learning all these different frameworks, right? That's like learning the frameworks is completely trivial after you understand MVC. Like I don't know, I have never used Ruby on Rails, but I can guarantee you I'll be productive on the thing within a day. Because like if as long as you understand the MVC pattern, all these other scary terminologies that you never heard of, it doesn't matter because everyone follows the same rules, everyone follows the same kind of ideas. So learning the actual base principle that all these different languages and frameworks express, that will set you up for far more success than if you just did that whatever Twitter tutorial on the newest JavaScript framework. No, you'll never learn following that. So if you actually learn the actual pattern, everything will be okay afterwards.
okay, that's fair. Thanks. That resolves a lot of questions. Well, the reason why I'm mentioning that is because, well, this is a fancy word. I kind of know it's a like front end framework, but
Hmm.
the thing is, they appear on some resumes, and
Yeah.
oh, sorry, not resumes, some job descriptions. I'm like, at
Hmm.
school, we probably will learn like React or something, but not almost everything that I see on the job description. So sometimes there is a new word that appears on the job description, and
Hmm.
I have never seen that before, and I was like, what is that? I don't even know if I'm qualified for that job. Sometimes I get scared on that, and they seem to take a lot of like outside school time to acquire that knowledge, and I just don't know how to do it. But after talking to you, I start to see basically it's still the same word. It's the idea that matters. You should probably get familiar with the idea. Even with this tail on Ruby on Rail, it's the MVC pattern that I have never heard about, but now I know this is the direction to go. If I know this model in my mind, I should know how to, use many different frameworks. And I also get a question from the crowd. Emily asked that um, many people has mentioned that GPA is less important than the projects in the industry, but still there are some companies asking for a GPA.
Hmm.
Based on your experience, what is the acceptable GPA to maintain? Do you have a number in mind?
Is this from YouTube?
Yeah, it's from YouTube
Oh, cool.
chat.
Yeah, cool. If you don't mind, send me the YouTube link. I can see the chat as well.
Oh,
So for this question, I would say the vast majority of companies that hire for tech do not care about GPA. There are a couple, and keep in mind, just because, and I don't know the company you're talking about right now specifically, but just because a company asks for your GPA doesn't mean they care about it necessarily. Like for example, Google asks for GPA, but that's mostly for their data analytics than for actually passing or failing people. Now that being said, I can't sit here and lie to you and say that GPA doesn't matter because GPA does matter for some people and some things. For example, GPA is really important for some finance. It's really important for certain government jobs which have requirements for that kind of stuff for funding. So I would say depending on your target industry, target ambition, 3.7 out of 4 is pretty safe. But some companies will be asking for 3.9, 4. So depends on the situation. But and most of the time, by the way, you can find out if a company wants GPAs or not just searching online. Like people just talk about that kind of stuff. For myself, my goal was basically 3.5 out of 4. If I keep 3.5, I'm cool. In reality, yeah, if you're going for tech companies, basically none of them care. In finance,
okay.
a lot of them more. So in finance, especially in quant, a lot more do. So if you're going for quant, you're gonna have to keep it up. Minimum 3.5, I think.
Okay, that's good to know. I heard from other sources 3 is good enough, but 3.5 is definitely safe to play. Yeah, and it's not too crazy to maintain, but still, it can be hard because I do
Yeah,
realize
yeah.
this term I'm having a lot of trouble to keep up with my GPA because of the intensive midterm schedules. But that's another topic. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, one
yeah,
thing I will say about the GPA is that like maintaining a GPA is not free, right? There's a lot of opportunity cost associated for many people, myself included, right? There's a very high opportunity cost associated with maintaining a high GPA. And the issue with that is that if you are someone like myself who is not the best academically, it's going to cost you a lot of effort to keep it up. When instead you could be spending the effort on other things, right? Let me give an idealistic picture here just to illustrate the idea, right? Let's say let's say if you put in quote unquote maintenance level effort, and your GPA is 3 out of 4, right? Reasonable. But let's say you're going for, let's say, oh, just in case, I kind of want to go for quant in the future, I should keep a 3.5, right? But the difference in effort for you to go from a 3 out of 4 to a 3.5 out of 4 could be the difference for you to make one solid project, like side project per term, like very solid side project. And so it is a case that, you could graduate with a 3.5 out of 4, even higher than that. But if you don't have the other skills to back it up, you're still not getting in, right? You're just because your GPA is that high doesn't mean you're in. So it's GPA is a necessary condition. It's not the only sole condition, right? So you have to keep it in mind. So if you sacrifice a lot of your time to have a high GPA, it is oftentimes never going to be worth it. When you could have instead just when you could have instead made more side projects to get into other companies instead. Now, if you're dead set, if you really, really, really want to go into quant or some similar industries, and you will not forgive yourself if you don't make it in, then yeah, you have no choice but to keep a high GPA. But for most people who aren't that dead set, just realize that it is oftentimes, in my experience, it is oftentimes a very high opportunity cost.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Um, yeah, I actually have one or two things to share about that. I have this classmate who takes the same course as I. Mm, for my course, 213, there are three quizzes. And as we all know, at the beginning of the term, there's a lot of open positions coming up. And I spent some time to apply for jobs with him. And after a while, I find it's too overwhelming to keep up both with job hunting and studying. So I kind of gave up on the job hunting. But he took another approach. He kept on the job hunting, and he did it in an extent that he just started to study for a quiz like one day before the actual quiz time. And
Mm-hmm.
as a result, he didn't do very well in the quiz, but at the meantime, he got into Shopify. That is his first internship. I find that really amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, he's he's done a pretty good job to catch up later, and it didn't hurt his GPA a lot. And at the meantime, another thing I want to say is that even though people want to maintain a very high GPA, that doesn't mean you have to like kill yourself doing that. Because for me, the way I mitigate with that is that I only take two courses. I can focus on study and building projects at the same time. If you don't want to give up any, just give like a little more time on that. That is my take on that. And Benny, I know that you have a different way to balance your study and job hunting. You have a good GPA, and you also take a lot of courses, and you mentor for hackathons. Like, can you share a little experience about how you handle this situation?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what Leo said. So yes, like I'm not trying to go for the 4.0. I'm trying to go for basically trying to optimize so that I get a decent enough GPA while spending as little time as possible. And I think compared to other people, I apply to less jobs. I prefer to use LinkedIn, reach out to people, connect with them, and then sort of just use things like referrals, for example. So I actually don't spend as much time just like cold applying. So maybe that frees up a lot of time too. Um, yeah, that's basically how I do it. And also I take courses while I'm interning as well, so that frees up some of the courses as well. So every internship I've been taking about two courses on average. So that's how I've been able to sort of do a lot of internships while kind of balancing courses to make sure I'm not too behind.
I see, I see. Do you dedicate time to apply for jobs every day besides school? Do you have a strategy or some tricks?
So not really. I primarily use LinkedIn. I think there are profiles up there that kind of tells you when the jobs are. So like, for example, like all the phone companies, there'll be like LinkedIn people posting on the jobs. So yeah, I just check LinkedIn maybe once a day, see like what's out there, and just apply that way. But most of the applications this cycle was through like mainly referrals. So I would say I didn't really like apply every day. It's just like whatever came. But I think let's shift to like I guess like my earlier stages, like when I didn't have any internships to start with.
Hmm.
I think back then I used a lot more networking. It's like for example, like for BCS, we always went to the SAP tour. Um, so like I would use these events to just talk to a lot of people, connect with them, see what they're doing, and then try to network with them that way as opposed to like just cold apply because I knew like kind of like what Leo said, like the resume wasn't too strong at that point.
Mm.
So yeah, overall, I just think like like code applications, we spend a bit less than people do unusual, and instead focus more on like just the like the connections outside like network of.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, thanks a lot, Benny. Um, Benny definitely dedicate a lot of time besides school because I know he was my mentor a year ago. That means he's like probably just 1 year in this program and he knows a lot about React and um like anything that's necessary to make a full stack web app to help to mentoring hackathon. So I find that's really amazing. And in this summer, I talked to Benny, and he is capable of solving lead code questions in a really fast fashion. And I also find that very amazing. Um, okay, so I guess that's what the point is. Besides school, there's still a lot of things that needs us to invest time on. If we can't do that, internship is going to be hard. Um, and I also find it's important to maintain the skill that we learned. For example, in summer, I learned 221. I hosted a weekly workshop with Benny and Leo. I learned some tricks with lead code, but last term I spent so much time with study. I didn't have the time to practice lead code. Right now, when I want to solve lead code questions, I kind of have to start from scratch. Maybe in a worse place than last summer, but it is what it is. But I also think it's important to find like a routine or some kind of way to maintain that skill. Leo and Benny, do you have some advices on that part? How to keep the skills sharp with while you are studying?
I can share a couple things. I mean, the first thing I'll say is that, as a disclosure, I am an interviewer, so I do this professionally. So obviously, it's always top of mind. But one thing I see
Mm,
that a lot of successful students and of course coworkers who are out there interviewing as well. Well, maybe I shouldn't name names, of course. But what
mm,
they do is there's always something going on in the coding world, right? For example, this past month, the past 25 days, there's this advent calendar called Advent and Code. Right now, Advent and Code, TLDR, every day there's two technical elite code style problems get released, and you solve them, and there's a cute storyline, and then blah blah blah, right? So this is a social event, right? Well, I guess for some people they actually find it challenging. They have to focus and solve it. For a lot of people, it's a social thing where it's like, oh, oh, how do you find the story? Oh, it's pretty cute, blah blah blah. So one thing I'm saying here is that there's like a public event going on that you can motivate your group, your coworkers, students, classmates, etc. to kind of participate in. That's a really, really powerful way to have commitment to do these kind of things. So that's one thing I would look out for is by having other people hold you accountable, and vice versa, you can hold other people accountable as well. So I think that's like a really, really effective way to do that. Otherwise, there is this is less sticky. I don't like it as much, but there is a lead code daily problem. which I don't like because the problems are usually not good. But if you're just trying to think about something more technical once a day, that's one thing you can do. But I think that and this is generally true for all things in life. Is if you want to be the most committed to something, you got to have people hold you accountable. And so establishing that kind of study group, whatever it may be, is the best way about that.
Okay, that's totally fair. Yeah, Benny, do you have something?
Yeah, like I think like for me, I think I got this advice from Leo as well. It's just like gotta focus on like quality over quantity, right? So I think
Mm.
like to date, I haven't done like as many questions as people think, but you gotta get the fundamentals down, right? So like questions I think are like very fundamental, or like those, for example, like number of islands, right? So that's like a pretty classic like breadth first search, depth first search question. So if you just understand like those fundamentals really well, and you can just always go back to a list. Things like a blind 75 is pretty good, or like a Nico 150. So I tend to just redo those when it comes to interview season. I don't really actually go out and sort of attempt like more questions as per se. So yeah, I just say get very solid at the fundamentals, and you'll quickly realize that like most of the questions are just based on those fundamentals.
I will
Okay.
add to that and say that yeah, I definitely I think I get that advice pretty often to people, and it's not surprising I gave it to Benny as well, which is that quality of leak code problems, like of solving leak code problems, matters a lot more than a quantity. And like whenever I see people come out here and say, oh, I did 4,000 leak code problems or something really ridiculous number, like, dude, calm down, bro. There aren't even like 4,000 leak code problems. What are you doing? You're doing like 5 a day, you know?
Mm,
There's only like 20 like types of questions that you can divide all the eco problems into, right? Like you can't like all these are variations of like the same 20 problems, right? It's a lot more effective, like as Benny said, to just focus on studying the actual fundamental problem and what it's asking, than to figure out how to subtly optimize this specific XYZ, but I don't even know of like this specific wording of the problem, right? That's irrelevant, right? That is not something which you should be practicing. The thing you should be practicing is identifying which of the 20 problems this eco problem is a part of, and how do you solve a problem that is of that class, right?
mm,
And I think this is definitely important to emphasize, because I see people view quantity as a proxy for the quality of their problem solving skills, but that's completely incorrect, because to chase quantity, people sacrifice the quality per solve. And this is very, very, very apparent when I interview candidates and I ask the code problem and they get it immediately, great. And then I ask and then I ask a follow up that's not on lead code, and then it completely falls apart, right? But I know, as the creator of the problem, that it should not fall apart, because it's the exact same principle extended to another level, right? So someone who can solve the base problem but cannot solve the follow up is just so clearly someone who just memorized the problem of lead code and doesn't actually have the skills necessary to solve a problem, right? So be aware that that is something that people are aware of, right? Everyone knows. Like, even when I was at Amazon, everyone knew. Oh, that problem, it's on leak code. It's been on leak code since 2017, right? Everyone knows that. Interviewers aren't stupid, right? But they still get a
mm.
good signal out of how you solve that specific problem, or that specific variation, or maybe a specific constraint, right? So there's a lot of different ways to vary a problem subtly, such that you actually have to understand the basic principle. So it's not worth it to go through 5, 10 legal problems a day, or however many people do. I don't even know anymore, right? Just to grind them out. Grind them out is not the right way to go about that, in my opinion.
Okay, that's really interesting. I actually got a question before this event start. I have this friend. He wanted to ask that question. He's done an internship and he's looking for the next one. He's kind of nervous before the
Mm-hmm.
technical interview because he realized that from time to time he is presented with a fresh interview question. He doesn't even know how to solve that,
Mm-hmm.
and that also stressed him a lot. A lot. So he wanted to ask this question: how to first of all handle the stress during the technical interview, and the second question is how to like solve those fresh question. He knows its effort probably in one of those 15 or 20 patterns. but he has trouble to identify the patterns. I
Mhm.
know this is an open-ended question. Right
Yeah.
after he asked me that question, I told him it's like you're asking how to get 100% in a math exam.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
too hard.
Yeah. So again, I'm not gonna plug anything. This is the exact kind of scenario that you want to be doing mock interviews for. Why is that? It's very clear because if you're someone who can solve problems on leetcode.com, but you can't solve the same problem in an interview, or okay, you didn't say it this way, but the way you said it actually means the same thing, right? You said that if you get in a problem in an interview setting, you don't know what LeetCode problem it corresponds to. There are no unique illegal problems, right? There's 20 types of legal problems, roughly 20. Um, every problem is one of the variations. That's it. Like that's all the problems that can exist for this level of skill, right? And so the specific kind of attribute that your friend there should be practicing is the process of reduction. How do you reduce this problem into its base constituents such that it becomes easy to identify which of the 20 problems this is a like which of 20 classes this problem is a part of, right? And I would say that there's, and I don't know that person's specific situation, so I won't give anything specific, advice wise, but I'll keep it general, and I'll say that, and I'm working on some guides with Eric. One of the best and most effective ways to practice technical interviews is not by practicing lead code, right? That you should still do that. It's a good way to kind of spend your 5-10 minutes of your own time, but a really really cost effective way to do this is by performing mock interviews with either someone who's trained or even with your friends, right? Like if you perform mock interviews with your friends and you both might be clueless, that's fine, right? You're not judging each other's complexity. No, that's not the point. The point is, can you be in the setting of an interview, in a mock interview, and perform at the same level that you can perform on leetcode.com? And that is a very unique and distinct skill because of the common things that they do in an interview, right? You have to explain your thought. You have to, actually write down what you're thinking of. You have to justify your reasoning, and you have to perform, on the fly analysis, right? So these are things which are really, really important that you can really address in mock interviews. And the key thing about doing mock interviews with your friends is that the person who asked the question doesn't actually have to know the optimal solution, right? Right? Like if you're an interviewer, obviously you have to know, you have to judge it, right? But if you're just a friend, you don't need to judge it. You can just ask the question as it comes up and blah, 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 and then just follow through the paces, right? Work through the paces because everything you can do to make the real interview more comfortable, more familiar, is going to help things like your ability to reduce problems. So those are, I think, really, really valuable ways to spend time. Now, and again, I won't give specific advice for this individual. I don't know their situation. I don't know why they're getting stuck on that. But, I just want to highlight that, just because you failed a technical interview or you didn't do well in a technical interview because you couldn't solve the problem doesn't mean that the antidote is to go on leetcode.com and start grinding. That is not usually the solution in those kind of situations.
Mm.
Now, Calvin
Yeah,
White asked a
that
question, and
Yeah.
sorry, I cut you off there. Both of you, actually. Charlie, do you want to speak first?
Oh, I just wanted to say yeah, but Benny, did you want to say something?
I just want to say, like, I completely agree. It's like I think that's one of the biggest thing people miss on people's resumes, right? Like, I'm never gonna say, hey, like, I failed 20 interviews before I landed this, right? Like, so, um, like, you really should use mocks. It's better to fail when Leo's interviewing me when it doesn't count, right? Than when the meta interview interests me and fails me. Like, I use that opportunity.
Yeah. I'll quickly address
Right.
Calvin's comment. Is there a reason people use LeetCode instead of CodeWare Codeforces? LeetCode is just the most popular platform. Actually, I agree that Codeforces is actually a better platform, but the questions are typically much harder. And in my experience, most people who are at the intern level or new grad level should just be comfortable solving LeetCode, medium LeetCode, and the easier parts. Like if you can consistently solve two LeetCode mediums in 45 minutes, that's good enough for like 90% of companies, right? Code forces is if you're really really trying to learn, like not just big O complexity, but like actual time analysis, like in seconds, right, or milliseconds, whatever it is, right? If you actually require that level of performance, then code forces and like Catus are far better platforms, right? Um, During my Citadel rounds, a lot of the questions were actually straight off of, well, not straight off of code forces, but like we're in that kind of style, where you kind of graduate lead code, you go into code forces, where you go into like basically CP, right? So I'd say in general, if you don't know what to prepare for, start with lead code. right? It's got the most support because it's the biggest platform. And then if you're finding that the companies you're applying to are consistently asking questions above Lead Code Hard, then I would say graduate to Code Forces.
That's
Um,
interesting.
yeah.
Okay, I have some follow-ups about mock interviews and preparing for technical interviews. Um, you mentioned two things. First, quality over quantity, and then mock into the importance of mock interviews. Let's do it one by one. So when you say quality over quantity, you mentioned that, there will be some variations for the code that is easy to come up with, but it's hard to solve if you don't know the principles. And do you have like a general follow-up kind of thing? Like what kind of questions should we ask ourselves to get the idea or make the most of those lead code questions?
Um,
Um,
Benny, you want to take this one?
Sorry, go ahead, Leo.
No, Benny, you go.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like I think for me, the biggest thing is like if I look at a question, I wanna brainstorm every single possible solution there is, and before I go to the next one. So like, um, what's a good example? Like maybe like a two sum problem, right? Like brute force is in n squared, but let's say if the interviewer wanted something with a constant space, right? Like that might be a better solution. So like I think for each problem, what I try to do is like if I solved it with a let's say the BFS, I would usually brainstorm and see, okay, can I solve it with a DFS? And why is the BFS better than the DFS approach? And are there other data structures like maybe like a union find just to solve the problem? So that's what I kind of mean by like quality. Just like per question, I actually spend a lot of time. So like for each question, I try to know every single possible solution. Um, and I just keep going back to these problems over time, as opposed to like exploring newer questions. That's kind of my approach to doing things.
Okay, I can see that. I can see that. Leo, do you have something to add on that?
I could say a couple things. I would
Mm,
say in terms of quality over quantity, it's sort of, I mean, the caveat is like that. That's my preference for doing problems, and that's my preference when I coach people to do problems because the biggest shortcoming I see when people basically, oh, I did 4,000 lead codes. It's usually not 4,000. It's usually like hundreds, like many hundreds, like almost 1,000 kind of area, right? I do that many lead codes, and I still can't solve the problem when it comes to interview, right? The issue is not that you haven't done enough lead codes. That's the emphasis, okay? You have done more than enough lead codes. You should stop doing lead codes, okay? The problem is that you're not thinking while doing the lead codes. That's the problem, okay?
mm,
And so when I say quality over quantity, what I'm saying is that when you fail an interview, your instinct should not be, okay, I gotta grind 5,000 problems in the sliding window category. That's not gonna solve the problem because you're gonna grind 5,000 problems, you're gonna get a sliding window again, and you're still not gonna solve it because it's the same difference, right? It's you know I think people are trying to compensate for thinking by just sheer volume and hoping that the interview happens to ask a question which you just know exactly, right? That's not a winning strategy, right? That's not a winning. It won't win now and it won't win later unless you're very lucky. But if you're hoping to be lucky, you should go buy a lottery ticket instead, right? So I think
mm.
most people should be instead of focusing on actually learning the underlying principle. Now, I'll build a bit on
Okay.
what Benny said, right? Benny said, okay, think of all the different types of ways to solve the problem, explore them, see what the trade offs are, right? Completely agree, right? Oftentimes, this is very, very common for people who don't do like people who are pure software, they don't do hardware, right? Is that people in software instinctively optimize for time complexity instead of space complexity. But there's nothing inherently different about time versus space, right? A lot of people aren't who come from hardware circles like electrical engineering or computer engineering. They have to optimize for space complexity because that's usually a limiting factor for them, right? So one thing I encourage people to do is, yeah, you can solve the problem quote unquote optimally, right? But then think to yourself, hey, because Charlie, you're asking this one. What question can you ask yourself? Here's a question you can ask yourself: can you, instead of optimizing for time complexity, optimize for space complexity? That's a very common follow up question that is asked, because everyone on lead code just solves for time. No one solves for space, but it's just a valid as any other optimization. So that's a very common way to test your understanding of how to manipulate these data structures, etc. Um,
Okay.
yeah.
That's totally valid because when you say software based complexity, my brain totally shuts off. I never heard of a question like that, but that kind of makes sense. Yeah.
I mean,
And also I
the one that
remember.
Benny just Benny just gave an example, right? Can you solve two sum with a constant space? Yes, you can. You would just need to use an n squared nested loop, right? But who's to say that's the worst solution, right? That way, use constant space. You know, if you're doing this on like a microcontroller or like an Arduino where you might have very little memory compared to like a computer or like a server or something, right? Then that might be the only way to run the algorithm. So this is so you know it's just another way to frame the same problem, but the solution can look completely different.
Okay, I see. Okay, thanks for these tips for the interviews. Um, I noticed we almost spent an hour on that already. I'm going to like rush to ask some other questions I have. Then I will, if there's more questions from the crowd, feel free to ask. I'm trying to control the time a little bit here, so I'm going to ask a few questions that I have prepared beforehand. Um, so this is a question that I am thinking for a while about internships. So, for example, I am looking for my first internship. The way I think about internship is that I want to use this opportunity to do some job that I'm interested, but probably not going to do on a full-time basis after I graduate. Do you think it's a valid strategy, or do you think to get a full-time job, it's better to align all your goals like really tightly? What do you think about that?
I'd say generally speaking, um,
Mm,
you should only kind of go for a so there's a pretty valid strategy here, right? In the valid strategy, which is commonly I would encourage most people honestly, is your last internship should be one that you want to get a return offer for, right? To get return offer for full time, right? That way you can kind of skip the full new grad full time job hunt, right? So that's definitely a valid strategy for that. However, right, your question you're actually asking is about the first internship, so not the last, but the first, right? So
mm,
then the question, the response I would give is you should be using the opportunity to find whether or not you really like a certain industry, right? Go get an internship in fintech or cloud or whatever there's these days like networking, etc. There's a lot of these, especially in Vancouver. There's a lot of these different types of sectors that hire quite a large number of interns in software, and so that's I would say is a more effective use of your first couple internships, one or two definitely.
mm. Okay, yeah, thank you for that. Benny, do you have anything to add on that? Like, what do you think when you look for your internship?
Yeah, I think again it's back to like which stage you're on. Like if it's your first one, you sometimes you're oftentimes you're not gonna get the most optimal, but as you move up, um, you should become more selective, like Leo said. So it just kind of depends on like which stage of the internships are you on. And,
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And another question I have is about rejections. Like we all know, we get a lot of rejections, even for the best of us. We get a lot of rejections before we find our first internship, or the second, or the third. Um, so there will be a lot of um, rejections coming up, and often people like me feel frustrated after a certain point, and sometimes it's the last straw that stopped us from keep looking for resume, keep looking for internships, and focus on study or other things. So, how do you guys think about this? Like, sometimes rejection means your resume is not good. Sometimes rejection just means you're not lucky enough. Like, how is there a way we can determine is my resume good enough or that kind of things? Like, how do we handle the rejection? Secondly, how do we find out why is the reason in general?
um, okay, that's a great question. Like, I think first is like keep your expectation low. I go into each interview not like saying, for example, let's take the meta interview. I didn't go in saying, okay, like I'm gonna go ace it and get the internship. I treated it kind of like a learning experience. And I think if you think about it this way, that the interviewer you're interviewing, right, like their total compensation is probably in the north of like 300,000, 300K, right? So they're kind of spending, essentially you're getting like a free $200 per hour of their time, right? To try to learn about the company and just try to work with them collaboratively, right? So you shouldn't feel like, this is like a painful experience. It's more like, wow, like I'm getting this free opportunity to talk to somebody who I normally have to spend like $200 an hour to talk to, right? So yeah, keep your expectations low and just try to have fun, right? And then I think in that case, it's like usually you'll do your best, and that's how I find it. And that helps me a lot personally.
Okay, that makes sense. Leo, do you have something to add?
Um, I think Benny hit it pretty clearly there. I will say as a tangent about interviews and spending interviewers' time is that uh, respect matters, which is a funny thing to have to say. Um, and aside from that, yeah, like the company says that hey, we're willing to spend however much money, like let's say $200 an hour, whatever it may be, to have this guy sit in front of you and talk to you for an hour, right? The company said that's worth our time because we believe that you have the chance to pass. If the company did not believe you had the chance to pass, there's no way they would spend $200 to interview you, right? So the company believes there's a chance that you might pass. We're willing to allocate the resources to test that theory. Let's see how it goes, right? And so that's the kind of that's the framework you're entering the interview from, right? But your question was a bit more general. Your question was, how did you uh, handle rejection? How did you figure out what the shortcoming was? I would say, most of the time, if you get rejected without an interview, that's just going to be because your resume was not there, right? It's not. It doesn't have the skills they're looking for. It doesn't have the depth of knowledge in the skills they're looking for, even if you have a match. Some people tell me this. It's very, very funny, actually. Say, oh, I put all the web technologies on my resume. I have React, Angular, Node, all these things, and I had a really good match with the job posting, but I still didn't get an interview. Why is that? Now, some people think that if you just list it on your resume, that's like a guaranteed 100% you're in. No, no, no. Right? If it's a very good match, likely a human will look at it and determine, first of all, are you bullshitting? That very very common these days. And second of all, the depth of knowledge you actually have in the listed technologies, right? And so just because you listed, oh, I know React, does not mean that you qualify at the React standard that the company is looking for, right? So this is an example. There's a lot of these examples, but this is an example of a distinction, which people oftentimes miss, right? So if you didn't get an interview, likely your resume was not there. Okay. Now, if you got into interviews and you got rejected afterwards, then it's likely because your interview skill was not there. And what by interview skill, what I specifically mean is not your ability to do lead code. No, my lead code skill, what I mean is your ability to convince the interviewers that you can operate at the level that they're looking for. And they might be evaluating your level through your ability to solve lead code. That's definitely one of the ways. But there'll be other ways as well. Like, for example, behavioral interviews is very common, right? They'll be evaluating your level of competency or the level of direction, how to level you afterwards, intermediate, senior, etc. Once you pass the technical rounds, there's a lot of different ways that people use the interview as a proxy to judge other aspects of your skills and abilities as a software engineer, right? So these are very very important things. Of course, after you get past the resume screening, after your interviews, these are very important things to look at, because when you get rejected after an interview or in some interview rounds, it's not necessarily because you did poorly on some specific technical problem. It could be that you did very well in the technical problem, but you did very poorly on explaining why you did well in the technical problem, right? That's a different skill, right? And those skills are actually independent. Your ability to perform and your ability to explain how you performed, right? Those are independent skills. I mean, they're usually correlated, but they're actually independent skills that are separately measured, right? Same with your technical prowess versus your ability to collaborate, right? So these are separate skills, oftentimes correlated. I will admit they're oftentimes correlated, but they're separate skills, and therefore they're measured separately, and therefore it's very very important that you touch on all aspects that they're looking for. This is also why, for example, people will fail a technical round. They come to me and say, hey, I did really well on the lead code. I got the optimal time, I got the optimal space, but I still failed. Well, guess what? The reason you failed wasn't because you didn't come up with the optimal space. Everyone knows you did. That's not the point of debate, right? The point of debate is, well, did you explain it correctly? Like, it's one thing to have a right answer, but did you show your work, right? This is a common thing that people think about, right? Did you, for example, did you, when the interview try to guide you to follow a certain solution, did you follow that? Right? Like you might have, there might be two ways to come up with the optimal time complexity for this problem, but the interviewer might have want to see a different one. Did you take their hints? Did you take their guidance? Right? Collaboration skills. So like there's so many different aspects that you can necessarily get rejected or fail an interview from. It's really important to kind of spend the time to think through and identify which of those was the case. And I will say
Okay.
that it's not always possible to know what is the case, but that is definitely something that should be reflected upon.
Mm, mm, thank you. Thank you for that. And another question is, it's more about the techniques of application. And by that I mean, like, there are many industries I want to try. For example, a data analyst. Another one is, for example, a software engineer for the game industry. Another one would probably be full stack, because I want to make my resume applicable for, like, compatible for as many jobs as possible. At the meantime, I feel like this is such a wide range. There probably one resume is not enough for all of them. So in terms of preparing for the profile, what do you suggest me to do? Should I prepare multiple versions of resume for each industry, or should I focus on a general, um, resume for most of the jobs?
I would say most of the time, if you're like, you should use the same resume for full stack, front end, back end. Those should be basically the same resumes. The exception to that rule is if you're going for a very exclusive company in that sector, then it would make sense to make a tailored resume for that. But most of the time, especially if you're still earlier in BCS, you won't have any distinctive factors between the three. So for those three, keep them the same resume. I would make a separate one if you're going for data science, ML, AI. Those are like those three. Like you can split those out into a separate one.
Mm,
So I would kind of categorize it that way. And some people go for
okay.
like hardware, hardware firmware programming like FPGA, ASICs, etc. Those ones could also be a separate one. But I'd say full stack, back end, front end, those could be the same ones.
Okay. I heard you. Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. I think I am running out of questions. In the crowd, does anyone have questions to add? Okay, I'll count to five. Five, four, three, two, one. Okay, seems like we are out of the questions. And that means I'm about to conclude this workshop. Thanks a lot for coming, everyone. And thank you, Leo and Benny, for sharing your experience. These are really helpful. I originally had a lot of trouble to get back on track of my job search, but after talking to you, I feel like job searching is making sense to me again. And this is really important for me. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone in the crowd. Thanks for coming, and I really appreciate your presence. And I hope you learned one thing or two in this workshop.